Hi, my name is David. I'm in Tainan, and this is Taiwan in English. In today's exciting episode, we will be continuing on with the legend of Sleepy Hollow. There is something in the story today that, to put it simply, will make some people uncomfortable or lead them to think something that is not true. It has to do with corporal punishment. In today's episode, our friend, our hero, Ichabod, is not torturing his students. He is correcting them in a way that was not only acceptable at the time, but expected. In this by place of nature there abode, in a remote period of American history, that is to say some 30 years since, a worthy wight of the name of Ichabod Crane, who sojourned, or, as he expressed it, tarried in Sleepy Hollow, for the purpose of instructing the children of the vicinity. He was a native of Connecticut, a state which supplied the Union with pioneers for the mind as well as for the forest, and sends forth yearly its legions of frontier woodsmen and country schoolmasters. The cognomen of Crane was not inapplicable to his person. He was tall, but exceedingly lank, with narrow shoulders, long arms and legs, hands that dangled a mile out of his sleeves, feet that might have served for shovels. His whole frame was loosely hung together. His head was small and flat at top, with huge ears, large green glassy eyes, and a long snape nose, so that it looked like a weathercock perched upon his spindle neck to tell which way the wind blew. To see him striding along the profile of a hill on a windy day, with his clothes bagging and fluttering about him, one might have mistaken him for the genius of famine descending upon the earth, or some scarecrow eloped from the cornfield. His schoolhouse was a low building of one large room, rudely constructed of logs, the window partly glazed and partly patched with leaves of old copybooks. It was most ingeniously secured at vacant hours by a reef twisted into the handle of the door and stakes set against the window shutters, so that though a thief might get in with perfect ease, he would find some embarrassment in getting out. An idea most probably borrowed by the architect Joost van Houten from The Mystery of the Eel Pot. The schoolhouse stood in a rather lonely but pleasantly situated, just at the foot of a woody hill, with a brook running close by and a formidable birch tree growing at one end of it. From hence the low murmur of his pupils' voices, conning over their lessons, might be heard in a drowsy summer's day, like the hum of a beehive, interrupted now and then by the authoritative voice of the master, in the tone of menace or command, or peradventure by the appalling sound of the birch, as he urged some tardy loitering along the flowery path of knowledge. Truth to say, he was a conscientious man, and ever bore in his mind the golden maxim, spare the rod and spoil the child. Ichabod Crane's scholars certainly were not spoiled. I would not have it imagined, however, that he was one of those cruel proponents of a school who joy in the smart of their subjects. On the contrary, he administered justice with discrimination rather than severity, taking the burden off the backs of the weak and laying it on those of the strong. Your mere puny striplings that wince at the least flourish of the rod was passed by with indulgence, but the claims of the just were satisfied by inflicting a double portion on some little tough, wrong-headed, broad-skirted Dutch urchin, who sulked and swelled and grew dodgy and sullen beneath the birch. All this he called doing his duty by the parents, and he never inflicted a chastisement without following it by the assurance, so consolatory to the smarting urchin, that he would remember it and thank him for it in the longest day that he had to live. When school hours were over, he was even the companion and playmate of some of the larger boys, and on holiday afternoons would convey some of the smaller ones home who happened to have pretty sisters, or good housewives for mothers noted for the comforts of the cupboard. Indeed, it behooved him to keep on good terms with his pupils. The revenue arising from his school was small and would have been scarcely sufficient to furnish him with daily bread. For he was a huge feeder, and though lank, he had the dilating powers of an anaconda, but it helped out his maintenance. He was, according to country custom in those parts, boarded and lodged at the houses of the farms whose children he instructed. With these he lived successively a week at a time, thus going the rounds of the neighborhood, with all his worldly effects tied up in a cotton handkerchief. That all of this might not be too onerous on the purses of his rustic patrons, who are apt to consider the cost of schooling a grievous burden, and schoolmasters as mere drones. He had various ways of rendering himself both useful and agreeable. He assisted the farmers occasionally in the lighter labors of their farms, helped to make hay, mended the fences, took the horses to water, drove the cows from pasture, and cut wood for the winter fire. He laid aside, too, all the dominant dignity and absolute sway with which he loaded it in his little empire, the school, and became wonderfully gentle and ingrained. He found favor in the eyes of mothers by petting the children, particularly the youngest, and like the lion bold, which whelmed so magnanimously the lamb did hold. He would sit with a child on one knee and rock a cradle with his foot for whole hours together. In addition to his other vocations, he was the singing master of the neighborhood, and picked up many bright shillings by instructing the young folks in psalmistry. It was a matter of no little vanity to him on Sundays to take his station in front of the church gallery with a band of chosen singers, where, in his mind, he completely carried away the psalm from the parson. Certain it is, his voice resounded far above all the rest of the congregation. But there are particular quavers still to be heard in that church, and which may even be heard half a mile off, quite the opposite of the mill pond, on a still Sunday morning, which are said to be legitimately descended from the nose of Ichabod Crane. Thus, by divers little makeshifts, in that ingenious way which is commonly denominated by hook and by crook, the worthy pedagogue got on tolerable enough, and was though by all who understood nothing of the labor of head work to have a wonderful, easy life of it. Now that my tongue and brain have been tied into knots, let's look at a short summary of today's events. Today's installment started out with how Ichabod tarried about and was the schoolmaster. It talked about how he ran his classes and how he punished students. The story continues with the many odd jobs that he does for people that make people like him and want him around. Today's questions. I want you to list the pros and cons. The topic, corporal punishments. Specifically, teachers using a stick to punish, hit students. If you do not think there are any pros, then state that clearly. The same is true for cons. I hope that you will try to steelman the idea, arguments that you disagree with. And that's it. Before you go, if you liked the video, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss anything. And don't forget to comment below. And as always, if you have any questions, you can find me here or on social media, links below. And I'll see you in the next exciting episode of Taiwan in English. Bye.